George Foreman was more than a boxing titan. He was a pastor, a tycoon, a father to 12 kids, and a soul who lived several lifetimes. But when he died, something odd transpired. His estate was swiftly locked down. Every drawer, vault, and safe bolted tight. For years, its secrets stayed buried. But when those barriers finally gave way, what spilled out jolted his family. The entire globe stood in stunned silence, confronted with irreplaceable mementos, unsent correspondence, private tapes, and concealed diaries that exposed a Foreman unseen by the spotlight. What seemed like the dwelling of a triumphant pugilist harbored something richer, something unsettling. This is the account of what was genuinely stashed within George Foreman's estate and why it left even his innermost circle wordless. George Foreman's tale didn't ignite in fame's glare. It took root in a tight, destitute pocket of Houston's Fifth Ward, a spot where dreams were rare and peril ever-present. Born January 10, 1949 in Marshall, Texas, George came of age encircled by brutality, adversity, and scarcity. His mother nurtured 7 children, eking out a living. He was wrathful, adrift, often caught in street scuffles and small-time misdeeds. Many wagered he'd meet death or bars before 20, but a turn came when Foreman enlisted in the Job Corps at 16. It was billed as a chance to learn carpentry and practical know-how. Instead, it ushered him into boxing and lent him his first whiff of meaning. One trainer caught the storm in his stare and said, "You can outgrow your fury." That solitary phrase, jotted on a scrap tucked into a training booklet, was later unearthed in a locked chest inside Foreman's estate, faded, frayed, and plainly cherished across decades. In a mere 2 years, George Foreman leapt from street ruffian to Olympic hopeful. In 1968, amid America's roiling unrest, he snagged the boxing gold at the Mexico City Games. He was just 19. He rejoiced by brandishing a small American flag in the ring, stirring both cheers and censure. The signal was bold. George Foreman had landed. He turned pro in 1969 and steamrolled the heavyweight field, flattening 37 of his first 40 rivals. Then, in 1973, he rocked the planet by smashing the unbeaten Joe Frazier in 2 ferocious rounds to claim the world heavyweight title. Frazier kissed the canvas 6 times in under 6 minutes. It was utter mastery, and eyes everywhere turned to him. Foreman's aura was frigid and fearsome. He rarely cracked a smile. In talks with reporters, he appeared stern and gravely intent. He stood as the emblem of sheer might, an unyielding juggernaut who didn't spar, he shattered. Yet at his core, he was still that enraged youth from Houston, wrestling demons beyond the men he faced. When his estate cracked open, a few profoundly personal keepsakes from his youth emerged, tenderly safeguarded. A childhood snapshot captured George barefoot on a dirt path, gazing blankly at the camera. A school notebook brimmed with jagged, heartfelt verses scratched along the edges. One declared, "They say I'm bad, but I'm not cruel. I fight so they'll notice me. I fight to be noticed." These neglected artifacts traced the outline of a boy hunting for selfhood, regard, and endurance from the outset. George Foreman wasn't born a conqueror. He battled into being one, etched with welts on his skin and gashes that plunged much deeper. In 1974, George Foreman towered over the boxing realm, unvanquished, unbreakable, and dreaded by all. Then he crossed paths with Muhammad Ali. The rumble in the jungle, held in Zaire, etched itself as one of history's grandest clashes. Foreman, younger, stouter, and tipped to triumph, strode into the ring with raw force, but Ali brought guile and stamina. He let Foreman wear himself thin, round by round, slumping on the ropes, tossing barbs, muttering jibes. Then, in the 8th, Ali felled Foreman with a right hand nobody foresaw. It was beyond a loss. It was a public stripping that broke Foreman's core for the first time. He wasn't the stalker. He was the stalker. That defeat hurled him into a grim abyss. He began probing everything, his vigor, his calling, even his creed. He dodged the press, drilled tirelessly, and plotted a return. But something inside had tilted. Then in 1977, an episode struck that Foreman would narrate for life, though many questioned its verity. After falling to Jimmy Young in Puerto Rico, Foreman staggered to the locker room and crumpled. He later swore he died, or nearly so. In that blackout, he claimed a vision bloomed, not mere light, but a being. He said God addressed him, ordering him to transform or fade. When he stirred, he was sobbing, bellowing, "I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ." Handlers and doctors thought he'd taken brain damage. Foreman held it was a divine awakening. He ditched boxing cold, sold his wares, and took to preaching in modest chapels and youth hubs. He said his war was no longer with flesh, but for spirits. What stayed hidden until his estate was unveiled decades later was a sealed journal from that 1977 night. It lay tucked behind a trick drawer in his secluded office. The leather skin was cracked with time. Within sprawled scores of pages, some crisp, some wildly etched. Queer doodles lined the borders. Angels, blazes, fiends, light slashing through tempest clouds. One sheet bore simply, "I saw my end. I saw who I might be. I picked light." The last page held a dire line, triple underlined. "God told me to change or die." To onlookers, it was a fighter's redemption, reborn as a preacher, but that journal bared something fiercer. A man certain he'd grazed death and returned tasked. This was when George Foreman rose anew, though the ember in him never wholly dimmed. When George Foreman stepped back into boxing in 1987, the world snickered. He was 38, bulkier than ever, and looked like a retired kin chasing faded laurels. Naysayers dubbed it a farce. Bookers branded him a relic. But behind the grin, behind the soft air, Foreman was fiercely resolute. This comeback wasn't about coins. It was about reclaiming a thread he'd dropped long before. For 7 years, he clawed back, deliberate and steady. Then, in 1994, at 45, George Foreman dumbfounded all. He toppled 26-year-old Michael Moorer in the 10th round to retake the heavyweight crown. The stands thundered. Voices of callers cracked. Foreman didn't howl or jeer. He sank to his knees and prayed. He'd done what none deemed doable, becoming the eldest heavyweight king, clad in the same red trunks from his Ali defeat 20 years back. But the story didn't halt there. After hanging up his gloves for keeps, Foreman unfurled a business realm none predicted. He began hawking an odd contraption, a tilted grill that siphoned fat from meat. It was plain, handy, and pitched with that now famed beam. The George Foreman grill stormed into homes everywhere, selling over 100 million units, amassing wealth no bout ever matched. When his estate swung open, they found the first model, singed, grease-splotched, and parked in a dusty kitchen nook. Penned beneath in Sharpie, this scored more knockouts than I did. More jarring was the basement vault's haul. Hundreds of branding sketches, alternate grill tags like the knockout cooker, and grill like a champ. One folder clutched a tossed pitch, lean, mean redemption machine. Close by, piles of uncashed checks, millions strong, sat overlooked in a drawer. Foreman had raked in so much he'd quit tallying. What he prized was kin. One photo shown. George in a yard, ringed by children, flipping patties while sporting his title belt as an apron. His scrawl on the back read, "Best title defense I ever pulled." In the end, the grill didn't just enrich him, it mirrored his second chapter, evidence that even the most splintered yarns can weave a glad finish. To the masses, George Foreman was a jovial, lovable colossus, a man of belief, a preacher, a father of 12. His sprawling brood, notably his 5 sons all dubbed George, wove into his legend. He once jested, if one hits the big time, "I want folks to know their daddy." But under the chuckles, rifts in the family fabric lurked, splits that wouldn't fully gape until he was gone. When probers entered Foreman's estate, they didn't just cross a mansion's threshold, they stepped into a breathing memoir. Every chamber cradled shards of his yesteryears, but what truly staggered them were the trunks. Over 20 locked wooden casks, each carved with a child's name, George II, George IV, Michi, Natalia. Each unlatched to spill tender relics, handwritten missives, kid doodles, cassette tapes, birthday notes, and unposted words. In the trunk tagged George III, they found a letter creased dozens of times, never mailed. Foreman wrote, "I was too harsh on you, too wrapped in what I wished you'd be. You didn't need to mirror me, just be you." At the base, blurred by what looked like a watermark, a line was struck through and redone. "I'm proud of you no matter what." Further in, behind a false wall slab in his study, they hit something more telling. A voice tape from 1991. Foreman's tone was worn, pensive. He said, "I thought the ring was the toughest, but no, the real test was coming home and being what they needed. Sometimes the ring beat home. That lone line landed harder than any fist he'd swung." The estate also cradled hundreds of unseen family shots. Daughters in grad robes, sons gloved in a backyard ring, offhand snaps of Foreman praying with his brood amid toys and clutter. It framed not flawlessness, but a man laboring, at times faltering, yet never folding. George Foreman wasn't just a scrapper in the squared circle. He was scrapping to bind a family while hauling the load of his past, renown, and faith. At the distant rim of George Foreman's Texas spread rose a singular edifice, a private chapel he'd forged with his own cash, blueprints, and sweat. It wasn't just a worship site, it was a retreat, a spiritual forge, perhaps the most hallowed ground he knew. Kin and confidants said Foreman preached there most Sundays, weaving sermons not just from Holy Writ, but from personal ache and rebirth. He named it the Fighting Place. But when Foreman passed and the grounds were laid bare, investigators stumbled on something veiled behind the altar. The marble base wasn't firm. It rose. Below, a slim stairwell dropped to a chamber even some offspring didn't know. A nook carved for him alone. Inside lay something both deeply holy and deeply disquieting. One full wall wore what Foreman called the prayer wall. Over 200 names in his hand. Some famed, others faint. Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, Mike Tyson, his children, old mates, even those who'd crossed him in trade or the ring. Next to each, a short prayer or verse, some for calm, others mending, a few just pardon. On a stand sat a hefty, dusty Bible, thumbed thin and bursting with jottings, underlined passages and private musings. One refrain echoed, scrawled over and over, "Forgive even your foes, especially your foes." But the queerest find was a folded sheet in a locked glass case titled Prophecy, dated 2004. It bore strange foretellings, nods to worldly chaos, a money crash, and something darkly dubbed the shaking of 2025. The closing line in block caps read, "God readies fighters, but not always for the ring." Some shrugged it off as an old man's ravings. Others saw it as a peek into Foreman's guarded thoughts on destiny, reckoning, and mankind's road ahead. This cloaked room didn't just bear a pious streak. It suggested a man still tussling with his yesteryears, the globe around him, and what might loom a fighter-turned-preacher who reckoned the fiercest scraps still waited. Under the main house of George Foreman's sweeping estate hid a shock, an underground, climate-mastered vault built like a hall of lore. But this wasn't a stage for gawkers. It was private, pristine, a shrine to a life of strife. Inside stretched rows of glass cases, drawers, and fixed displays, all logged with soldierly exactness. Robes, gloves, trunks, boots, each marked with a foe's name, fight date, and knockout round. Every blow Foreman landed was tallied here. They found the blood-crusted red trunks from his 1973 ruin of Joe Frazier, stiff with ancient sweat. Nearby, the golden robe from the 1974 rumble in the jungle shone under faint lights, though a slight rip near the collar murmured of that night's sting. At the room's far end, folded tight in a sealed glass box, rested the shorts from his 1994 world-jolting win as the oldest heavyweight champ. In a corner loomed a tall, weighty safe. When pried open, it spilled over $1 million in cash, neatly strapped, untouched. Why Foreman hoarded such a stash stays unclear, maybe a fallback, or perhaps a token of what he once chased. But the most piercing find was a small envelope in a drawer labeled Ali, penned in Foreman's script, "For Ali, do not open until after I'm gone." Inside, a curt note read, "I forgive you, I wish I'd said it sooner." It was a potent end to one of sport's naughtiest rivalries, a clash that framed Foreman's early days and gnawed at him for years. The Vault of Champions wasn't just keepsakes, it was a bearing, timeline, a log of every bout, every tumble, every rally, and every instant that forged a man who never quit scrapping, even after the final gong. To the world, George Foreman was bliss made flesh, a booming chortle, a gleam in his eye, a man who'd bested pain and found calm. But behind that broad grin lurked a man still dogged by his past heft. Those closest, his children, old pals, tight circle, knew the score. George Foreman lugged guilt like slabs in his ribs, guilt he seldom aired aloud but sifted through in quiet, late hours. After he passed, a small, battered leather folder turned up in the nightstand drawer by his bed. Inside were just 2 pages, handwritten, time-stained, folded tight. The first, titled "My Failures," was brief but leaden. One bit read, "I skipped birthdays for the belt." Another, "I backed men, but neglected my own." But one line iced his kids, letting my anger raise my sons. Those 7 words cut sharper than any jab. Foreman, the man of faith, of glee, of peace, owned he hadn't always been that man, especially at home. In his early stretch, notably as a young brawler, his ire had molded his fathering. He craved greatness, might, when his sons needed a dad. Below lay a second list, "My hopes," penned in gentler strokes, lines more spread. It read like a plea, that they recall my laughter over my quiet, that they grasp why I return to the ring, that they hold each other even when I'm dust. At the foot, a single line, that they see the man behind the gloves. That sentence bottled all Foreman chased after retiring. Not just a mark, but insight, a nod that behind the glory, the rage, the riches stood a flawed, tangled man, one who never ceased trying to top the self he'd been. When George Foreman's last will surfaced, the family reeled. They foresaw a routine carve-up of his vast holdings, even cuts for his children, assets split clean, no stir. But Foreman left something far more intimate, far more divisive. His will decreed his bounty wouldn't split level, but by who needed healing most. This was scratched in thick ink on the document's face, trailed by a note. "We all need different things. Some need turf, some need love, some need truth. To some kids, he left houses, rides, and slices of his ventures. Others got troves of letters, diaries, and vault relics, items thick with feeling, not funds. But one child, a long estranged son he'd not spoken to in years, got nothing but a sealed cassette tape with his name and a date, marked "Play only when you're ready." When spun, Foreman's voice rasped out, calm, firm, grave. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone and you're still clutching hate. Drop it or it'll sink you. I never stopped loving you, but I couldn't bear your anger and mine too." It was a straight shot from the grave, hitting like a rib cracker. Some kin found balm in the will's soulful bent. Others fumed. Rows flared behind shut doors. Within weeks, siblings lawyered up, sparking a low, sour legal tangle that soon hit the news. Headlines screamed, "Foreman family split over spoils." But maybe George Foreman saw it coming. Maybe he carved it this way not to ignite strife, but to bear it, to push talks long dodged, to patch hurts he could no longer mend himself. The will wasn't just a handout of wealth. It was a last homily, asking one thing: can you forgive even now? George Foreman fought in the ring, the pews, and his own chest. His estate wasn't just a house, it was a breathing chart of the man. Victor, father, preacher, stray, searcher. What they found within: sealed diaries, lost notes, million-dollar checks, buried admissions, unveiled a life far denser, far messier than the public ever spied on. He wasn't just a myth. He was a man scrambling to square his past before time slipped. And in the end, it wasn't the crowns or the cash that counted. It was whether those he held dearest could at last see the man behind the gloves.